Nepoualtzitzin, the wisdom of counting in the Mesoamerican world, the Mayan Abacus and Board. This video is centered in presenting you a synthesis of my book, which speaks about the magnificent knowledge of pre-Hispanic science. My name is Maria Elena Romero Murguia, and I have a degree in Pedagogy by the UNAM in Mexico, and a master's in education with a specialty in humanities by the Instituto Tecnológico y de Estudios Superiores de Monterrey. I have been a teacher for 44 years, and right now I'm a retired professor of the thesis from Puebla. The present video is a synthesis of my book that is an effort of 37 years of designing didactic material on iconography and pre-Hispanic mathematics. This work is an adaptation of my research in the northern mountains of Puebla, Mexico, that was the basis of my thesis, and recognized with honorific mention by the UNAM. First of all, if we're speaking about Mesoamerica, we need to know what Mesoamerica means. If you see the map, you're going to notice that not all Mexico is Mesoamerica, and that not all Mesoamerica is Mexico. Let's see the following map. That will probably clear the things out for you. If you see the map of Mexico, you will notice that I have enhanced the line that is called the Cancer Tropicus, which is a line that geographically marks the most northern point in which we can see the sun at the zenith. This, of course, means that from this line to the south, the climate is more gentle, and it's easier to live, to have crops and cultivate. While in the northern part, this is what we call arid America, or the cultures of the desert, in which people were commonly nomads. So if we go back to the other map, then we will understand that Mesoamerica involves 5 regions, which are the Northwest area, the Central Plateau, the Gulf Coast area, the zone from Oaxaca, and the Mayan area, which includes not just Mexico, but also Guatemala, Belize, El Salvador, and Honduras. But if we're speaking about a counting system, the first thing we have to address is, what is that we count? What is the meaning of counting? How long ago do we count? Who is the one in charge of counting? Why do we count? What is the first thing that humans possibly counted? How? Where? What for? If you go deep inside the essence of a culture, you will realize that counting is being conscious, is the ability of registering the memory of the cycles of time, spaces, and transformations. To count means to number, to refer, to relate, to include, to narrate, to compute, and many more things. Well, that's exactly what we're meaning when we are saying to count. So let's go back to the pre-Hispanic times. and tried to acknowledge what was the meaning of counting for them, and why was it so important to keep a close track of time in stones, in codices, in buildings, and also in the legends of the culture. If we see the next slide, we will see a serpent with 2 heads. And this will be the meaning of duality as the foundation of Mesoamerican culture. What is the possible meaning of this marvelous sculpture? Usually the head is associated with the beginning, and of course the tail will be associated with the end. So what happens when we see this sculpture with no tail, but instead another head? So there is a beginning, and when you think the cycle will be over, there is another beginning. So it's like the never-ending story. But also the meaning of the serpent is something very, very special for Mesoamerica. As you know, the serpent, each year, it sheds its skin. So this is the meaning of eternal renewal, of rebirth, and of eternal life. Life never ends. It just changes and begins another cycle. Sometimes we're going to see this same serpent as one that is biting its own tail, as the alchemical Ouroboros of the Middle Ages. But this symbol is also present in all Mexican culture, still in nowadays. For example, the Mexican flag has the eagle and the serpent as a duality of one that flies and one that crawls. We also have the next symbol of the day and the night as a duality, or death and life, with Mitlantecutli, the god of the dead, and Quetzalcoatl in one of his advocations as life. And there's also another duality that we're going to see later, that is the duality between the serpent and the jaguar, one meaning the sun, the light, and the other one meaning the moon, the darkness. The myth of Quetzalcoatl is in itself a duality, a feathered serpent, and also the conception of the cycle of death and life, and the 3 planes of the universe symbolized by a ceiba tree, whose branches spread to the skies and whose roots go deep inside into Mother Earth. The main concept of Mayan mathematics is based on duality. As you know, they use dots and bars, symbols of the duality, that you can say also they're symbols of the male aspect and the female aspect. This is a binary system. As you see the next slide, you will see the goddess Coatlicue, which means Mother Earth, the one with the skirt of serpents. And if you know the meaning of the serpent, that means renewal, eternal life, fertility, you will know that Mother Earth, of course, is full of fertility. But on her womb, she has a skull. That means, of course, death. Where do we go when we die? To the womb of Mother Earth. And as you can see in the sculpture also, instead of head, we have 2 serpents joining together face to face. And instead of feet, we have 2 claws of an eagle. So the eagle has descended and the serpents have ascended. So this whole concept of duality is present in all Mesoamerican culture, in all of its aspects, in science, in philosophy, religion, or art. If we see the next slide, you'll see the sunstone. And if you ask yourself, is this science? You will answer, for sure, there is science there. There's a lot of cycles registered, astronomical orbits. And if I ask the question, is there art there? And you will answer, of course there's art. Look at this magnificent proficiency of carving this huge stone of 26 tones and 3.60 meters wide. And if I ask the question, is there religion here? You will answer, of course. Here are represented some of the main gods of the ancient religion. And if I ask you the question, is there philosophy here? You will for sure answer, yes, of course. Here, there is the greatest cosmogony and cosmovision of this magnificent culture. But let's see what is exactly in the sunstone. When we first see the sunstone, we see so many things that it's very difficult to identify each one of the parts. So let's go one by one. In the first place, if we go to the center of the stone, we will find the glyph called Nawi Olim, which means four movement. That is a glyph that appears in the legend of the suns from the Chimalpopoca Codex. Here we can see 4 squares around the main circle that represent 4 times in which humanity has been created and has been destroyed by a terrible cataclysm. This is part of the main legends of pre-Hispanic times. In the very, very center of the circle, we find the face of the sun god, which is called Tonatiuh. But a lot of people ask, if this represents eras of humanity or ages of humanity, how long did they last? And if we see the next slide, we will understand how long and why. As you can see in the left side of the slide, there's the Earth. And you can see that the axis of the Earth is not exactly vertical, but it's a little bit tilted to the left. So, when this axis points, for example, to the center of the galaxy, it will take almost 26,000 years to complete a great cycle. And this is the 5 suns of Mesoamerican calendars. This means that each sun or each age lasts approximately 5,184 years. All of this huge cycle is known in astronomy as the ecliptic of the precession of the equinoxes. If you remember, some years ago, everybody was speaking of the end of the Mayan calendar. Well, this was not exactly an end, but an end of a huge cycle and the beginning of another one. And when did this happen? On the 21st of December of year 2012. So according to the Mayans, this changing or this transition comes in a window of 36 years. That means 18 years before 2012 and 18 years after 2012. and 12. So that means that we're just in the middle of the transition. So let's go to the next slide, in which you can see around the sunstone there are 2 flamed serpents with 13 spaces or sections in each one of them. These are known as Shiu Guami. If we see the next slide, you will have a close-up of the head of one of the serpents, in which you can see the jaws of the serpent opening and a human face in yellow appearing. This is the face of Tonatiuh, the same face that appears in the very center of the sunstone, which is the sun. And since it is yellow, it represents the sunrise. And if we see on the top of the head of the serpent, there's like a little horn in the form of a spiral with 7 concentric white circles. These white circles represent the 7 sisters, the Pleiades. As you know, the Pleiades is a sub-constellation from the constellation of Taurus, and this group of stars are found every 52 years at the zenith point of Mesoamerica, when they celebrated a huge ceremony that was called the New Fire, in which all the fire of the community was extinguished, and then the main priest will go on top of the main pyramid, light up a new fire, and from this fire all the heads of each house will share it in order to have a new cycle. Also, in these times, all the pottery of the community was broken, and new pottery was being built. And this is a symbol of the birth of the new cycle. Why? As you know, when a baby is going to be born, the bag in which the baby is floating in water breaks, and then the baby is able to be born. So this bag is the meaning of the womb, and the womb is many times represented in Mesoamerica as a pot that, when it breaks, represents the new birth, the new life. Now, if we go to the next slide, imagine that we're going to take away from the sunstone the glyph of the Nahuiolin, which is in the center, and the 2 feathered serpents, which are called Shukuami. What will be left? So in the next slide, you'll see that there are 7 concentric circles, each one of them with a different number of elements that usually represent cycles in astronomy, cycles, for example, of comets, cycles of eclipses, and revolutions of the planets around the Earth. So as you can see here, there's the hard science of Mesoamerica. In the next slides, you can see another way to have this interpretation. There are 7 circles that can be combined. For example, the first one with the second one, first one and the third one, the first one and the fourth one, and so on. So we'll have multiple alternatives of astronomical combinations. This is why we understand why the Mesoamerican culture was an expert in astronomy, math, geometry, and nature's cycles. In the book I describe each one of the cycles of the sunstone, and you'll see the relationship with astronomy, mathematics, and nature. But let's go to the next slide. Pre-Hispanic culture, as many ancient cultures, is distinguished by many gods, but probably one of the main ones is Quetzalcoatl, which is normally known as the feathered serpent. But let's go deep inside the meaning and see what other things it hides. Quetzal is the name of a bird, a precious and divine bird that lives in the southern parts of Mexico and Central America. This little bird has beautiful, stunning feathers. That's why the name Quetzal meant the bird, but also something that is precious or divine. The other part of the word, coatl, means serpent, but it has a second meaning, which means twin brother. So that makes this Quetzalcoatl with two different meanings. One will be the feathered serpent, but the other one will be the divine twin. And many of you will ask yourselves, what is the divine twin? Or who is the divine twin? Well, the divine twin is Venus, because you can see Venus sometimes during the sunrise, a little before the sunrise, and sometimes a little after the sunset. If you pay attention to Quetzalcoatl, you will see on his chest a huge pectoral with a transversal cut of a seashell. If you remember, the Mayan zero was represented by a seashell. But why the seashell? Duality has its implications here. If you have a seashell, the animal, the snail that lived inside is no longer there. It means that it has died. So, in this way, it's absence of quantity. But the animal left the evidence of its life through the circles and the spirals of the shell. So in this sense, it means presence of quality. The cycles of time are represented as a potential that is inside the shell. And this is a very different concept of zero, as you can see. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, we will see another god that is the duality of Quetzalcoatl. Tezcatlipoca is his brother, but also his greatest enemy, his nemesis. The word Tezcatl means mirror in Nahuatl, and Ipoca means that is smoking. So the complete meaning of the word Tezcatlipoca means the smoked mirror. But what is its meaning? If we see the next slide, you'll see the jaguar. The jaguar was the symbol of Tezcatlipoca. So if Quetzalcoatl means knowledge and life and light, Tezcatlipoca means death, night, danger, fear. So as you can see, is the duality of the sun and the moon, or the night and the day. The ancient Olmecs used to say that the dots or the spots in the skin of the jaguar were the stars in the sky as small eyes that were watching us. So in the next slide you will see both of them, Quetzalcoatl to the left and Tezcatlipoca to the right as antagonists, surrounded by all the symbols of the years in this huge cycle of the Pleiades. This is part of the Borbonic Codex. In the next slide, we see the 3 calendars in Mesoamerica. As you know, pre-Hispanic culture was almost obsessed by the counting of days and keeping track of time. So, which were the 3 calendars that they followed? The first one, of course, the sun, which was also known as the crop calendar or the civil calendar, which structure was 360 days plus 5 days more in a sequence of 18 months of 20 days. This was the calendar that rules the festivities of the community, the processions, the prayings, the fastings, the offerings, the sacrifices. The second calendar was based on Venus and was a calendar of 260 days in a structure of 20 symbols and 13 numbers. And this was also known as the ritual or sacred calendar, and it was the one that gave the spiritual name to people. The third one is the Pleiades calendar, that we said before it was a calendar of 52 years, structured by 4 symbols and 13 numbers. The combination of these 3 calendars were represented as cycles within cycles within cycles. And as you notice also in the sunstone, there were greater cycles than that, such as the ecliptic or the precession of the equinoxes of 26,000 years. This is the end of part 1.